Making your own original characters based on a world that you've grown to love can be an extremely rewarding process. The more time and effort you put into crafting the intricate details of a character's design, their personality, their powers, their abilities, their weapons, etc., the more that you will grow to love those characters, and the more they're going to mean to you overall. But crafting your own original characters can be a bit of a tricky process, especially if you are trying to craft them in such a way that they will logically fit within the world that you're basing them off of. Because every world that has already been pre-established, whether it's from a televised series or a novel, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi or anything in between, every one of those worlds comes with pre-established rules and limitations that characters have to follow to exist within those universes. And the world of RWBY is certainly no different when it comes to rules and limitations put on characters for them to exist within that universe, with every character having their own semblance, their own unique weapons and fighting styles, the kingdom that they call home greatly influencing their outlook on the world, whether they're human or faunus, dictating what experiences they had when growing up, again, depending on what kingdom they were born in. There are many rules that apply to the RWBY universe. Heck, even the naming schemes of characters have a rule associated with them. The color naming rule that was inspired by the Great War that took place in Remnant's history, and was also put in place by the creator of the show himself, Monty Oum. He even laid out detailed instructions to follow the color naming rule for people who are creating original characters to exist within the RWBY universe. This also applies to team names as well, so there's a lot to think about when creating your own RWBY original characters. So in this video, I'm going to go over the general ideas that I think people should be keeping in mind when designing their own original characters, and mention some of the pitfalls that I see people stumble over when they are designing characters to fit within the canon RWBY universe. I'm by no means an authority on original characters, but after analyzing the RWBY series so much for different theory videos and other things on top of that, I have a pretty good idea of what would actually fit within that universe and how things would actually go, so I'm going to give my general ideas on the topic, as it seems a lot of people are interested in creating their own original characters for that universe. I'll also go over maybe a couple starting points that would be good to start taking inspiration for where to design your characters, what directions to go, and I will also go over how I designed my own personal OC character, Seraphina Vermilion, that has already been introduced to this YouTube channel. There are more characters that I have designed and will be introduced to the channel later on, but, you know, I'll save those for their actual proper introduction. I will leave a link in the description below to a wiki page that is completely dedicated to RWBY fan-made characters, and they have their own specific rules that they've laid out for characters to follow, and honestly, it is an excellent starting point to start designing your own original character. They have the rules laid out very well for fitting within the canon universe, and there's plenty of OCs already on the site that you can use as inspiration with their different weapons, their semblances, their character origins, etc. There's a lot of good resources there, and by all means, I encourage you to check it out. But at the end of the day, all that matters is that you love the characters that you design, so design however you please. But if you are wanting to make your characters fit within the canon universe of RWBY, I do have some suggestions. And the first thing, and probably the most important thing, that I think people should keep in mind when designing their own original characters for the canon RWBY universe is that your characters, as well as everyone else's characters designed to fit within canon RWBY, are all meant to exist within that universe at the same time. Which means there is definitely going to be overlap between a lot of the different characters, and that's completely fine. There are semblances that have very similar abilities, in fact some that have the exact same abilities in the world of RWBY. Carmen Esclados and Glinda Goodwitch have the exact same semblance of telekinesis. So that kind of overlap is completely fine. Same with the inspiration of different fairy tales, the weapons overlap, etc. But there are certain traits that you have to be careful about giving your characters, as they become reality breaking if your character and 1,000 other characters are all of a sudden introduced to this universe that have this trait that's supposed to be rare. And the most obvious example of that in the world of RWBY is, of course, the Silver-Eyed Warriors. I completely understand the desire to want to make a character that is a Silver-Eyed Warrior, but unfortunately that would be considered non-canon because of the nature of the Silver-Eyed Warriors. They are meant to be a dwindling race. There are only 3 that we know of that could have existed in the past 10 years of the RWBY universe as we know it. Ruby Rose, Summer Rose, and Maria Calavera. Maria's father as well, depending on when he actually passed on, and of course there could be other silver-eyed warriors, but there's probably not 1,000 or more of them. So if one person is allowed to create a silver-eyed warrior character that's considered to be canon, so could so many others, and then their numbers just aren't dwindling anymore. Hopefully that makes sense. And another common little thing I see people stumble over is they want to create a Faunus character, but have it be a rare genetic mutation where they manifest 2 Faunus traits instead of 1. And although that may be possible in the world of RWBY, though it seems a pretty strict rule that based on genetics you will only manifest 1 Faunus trait, well, if one person has that rare genetic mutation and so do 1,000 others, then it just becomes more commonplace that Faunus now are manifesting 2 Faunus traits rather than 1, and that type of thing unfortunately just wouldn't fit within the RWBY universe. So there are certain little things like that that have to be considered, that your character and everyone else's is meant to exist at the same time. So things that are currently considered rare in the RWBY universe still need to be considered rare after that occurs. The next major thing that I think people should be aware of when designing their own original characters to fit within canon RWBY is to be aware of your character's skill level compared to the age that you're setting them at. Because I've seen a lot of people who create characters that are meant to be students, still at Beacon Academy or Shade Academy, Haven Academy, Atlas, wherever it may be, but they're still students, and yet based on the description that they're given for these original characters, they're meant to be an incredible prodigy who could compete with the likes of Crow, who's supposed to be a legendary huntsman. That type of thing just, again, can't be allowed based on the previous rule as well, because your character and, 1,000 others, 10,000 others could be in the exact same boat. So all of a sudden, that just raises the power level of everyone who is entering the academies that year, and just raises the overall power level of RWBY in general. So you have to be aware of the power level you're setting your characters at. For my team, my original characters, Seraphina, Vermilion, and the rest of her team, I wanted them to be at a level comparable to Team RWBY in the canon storyline, who is currently 19 years of age, at least for Blake, Weiss, and Yang, and 17 years of age for Ruby Rose, at least as of the filming of this video at the end of Volume 7. And they are a team that are essentially the best of their class. They have been trained specifically by the best huntsmen in Atlas, have had a lot of unique training and battle experiences that other students just wouldn't have. Other students, just regular students, which your original characters would be, unfortunately they can't really be prodigious levels of Pyrrha or, Team RWBY, etc. But if you want a team to be at the same skill level of RWBY, you can do what I did. Age them up a few years. My team is all around 23 years of age. So 4 years more experience of Team RWBY. They've had 2 years competing or doing jobs as huntsmen already, working in that field, and have all of this experience so they could be a comparable skill level. That type of thing has to be considered. If you want to create a character that is highly skilled, that is, a kind of legendary huntsman. Again, you have to be careful about how you work things, but you'd have to age them up to the level of Crow, so that they've been a huntsman for, a decade already, 2 decades, however long it may be, so that they can master these skills that they have available to them, and it would make more sense, rather than having, a 25-year-old that is the best in their field, able to, snipe Grim from, 10 kilometers away, or however it may be. Like, things have to be considered when it comes to power level. And that is also true when it comes to semblances. One thing that I see a lot of people fall into, there's quite a few things, and it's mostly around semblances actually, is that the most basic thing about semblances is they operate off of aura. Aura has to be considered in all of this. Most characters, in fact every original character that is created, should have normal levels of aura. Jean is an anomaly. He has, an incredible amount of aura, but original characters, since we are, having thousands of them introduced into the world of RWBY, they have to have normal levels of aura. There has to be a baseline set for every original character, otherwise that's just going to alter the RWBY universe itself and thus become alternate universe. So when you are considering your character having normal levels of aura, their semblance has to have abilities that can operate within that. The most frequent thing I've seen that is completely reality breaking and just completely alternate universe is anything involving the manipulation of time. I've seen people create semblances that are just, well, You can stop time for a couple seconds, a couple milliseconds, etc. But you have to consider the scale that that would be. You know, by just stating that you're stopping time, that would mean you're stopping time for every kingdom in Remnant, the entire rotation of the entire planet, everything happening in the universe. If you are stopping time for a brief second, the amount of aura that would be needed to do that wouldn't be possible by combining the aura of every living thing on Remnant. Like, that type of thing really has to be considered. Even if you're just stopping time in a brief bubble, this is still something that is like a fundamental law of the world. It's different when you come to reality-breaking semblances on the level of Crow and Clover, where it's manipulating the probability of single actions, or the outcome of single actions. Because every action has its own probability associated with that, and manipulating that one thing, although reality-breaking, isn't on the same scale as manipulating time. Whereas if a character even manipulates their own time, or something like that, it still becomes a way of breaking reality. What you have to consider is more what you want the end goal of the semblance to be, what you want them to be able to do. Do you want them to be able to move really fast for a briefer period of time, get behind opponents really easily? Well, there's other ways to do that other than manipulating time, things like that. I plan on doing separate videos based on semblance design for OCs, based on weapon design for OCs, and other specific things, where to place your OC in the world of Remnant itself, and the different kingdoms and things like that. So I will go into a lot more detail in those specific videos, but there are, you know, general things that people should keep in mind, at least in my opinion, when designing these types of specific things. And then it also comes to weapons. The best question I think you can ask when designing a weapon is, just because you can, should you? Because I've seen people design weapons where their weapon has, 4 to 6 different forms, has the ability to use every type of dust imaginable, and can also, be the best long-range weapon as well as the best close combat weapon, and there doesn't really seem to be any downside to them. The characters in RWBY, if you look at their specific weapons, their specific semblances, they normally do very simple things. It's just how the characters utilize them. Semblances are always a single ability. Nothing more, nothing less. Again, the semblance of glyphs is like an exception to a lot of these rules because it's hereditary, it has multiple abilities with it, seems to have some magic in it, so just remember, glyphs is always, an exception to the semblances, but every other semblance is always a single ability, and it's up to the character to learn how to use them through their experience that they've had in the different fights that they've had, and the experience they've had training, etc., to learn how to master it, to learn how to use it in new, unique ways. When they talk about semblances evolving, it's more how the character has evolved along with their semblance in how to use it, not really the semblance gaining a whole bunch of new abilities on top of that. That type of thing it needs to be considered. And when it comes to weapons, it all goes into a character's fighting style. If they're close combat, then that's what their weapon is going to be geared towards more. If you look at the weapons in RWBY, again, I'll use Crow as an example and his Harbinger. He could add a hard light dust blade to his Harbinger so that it would cut a lot better and things like that, but Crow just isn't a dust specialist. If we look at John as well, he fights with a sword and a shield, and he got some dust upgrades in Volume 7. That seemed logical. He used the hard light dust to extend the blade of his shield. Sure. And he added gravity dust to his shields to give him a little bit more of defensive capability. Yes, but he is still a close combat fighter. He still fights with sword and shield, not being a dust master on top of being a, close combat specialist. He's very much just close combat and sticks to that. That is where he puts his skill points, quote-unquote, into. So you have to consider what your character is going to be, whether they're going to specialize in the utility of aura, whether they're going to be close combat or ranged, whether they're going to be a master of dust, etc. If you look at Ruby Rose, she fights with her scythe close combat, but she also has a sniper rifle for long range. If you look at the fights that she's been in, though, she more heavily leans towards the close combat for finishing enemies and uses the sniper rifle more if she just doesn't want to get close to her enemies, or as a more support function rather than being able to, be the best sniper in Remnant. And speaking of being the best at something, no original character should ever be classified as being the best at anything. They can be highly skilled, but they can't be considered the best. That just doesn't really seem to fit, especially, again, harking back to that first thing and most important thing, that if you and 1,000 other people say your characters are the best at one specific thing, well, how exactly is that going to fit? On top of that, even if your characters are highly skilled, they need to have weaknesses. There is no perfect character. Every character in the RWBY series you can see losing in some way, shape, or form. And your characters have to follow that same thing. They have to have weaknesses. They have to, looking at that character, a person has to be able to say, that character looks strong, but I could also see them losing in these certain situations. They could be having situations that they are extremely strong in, but they still have to be ways that they can be defeated. When designing my own characters, I really don't like seeing them lose or in pain or anything like that, but you have to imagine that they have the possibility of losing. When I was writing the story for Seraphina Vermilion, how she started out in Vacuo, she was one of the better fighters in her tribe, a tribe of untrained people who were just trying to survive in the desert, fighting against whatever Grimm came around. And she, at the age of 12, was able to fight against some Grimm and do pretty well for herself. But, you know, I quickly wrote into the story that she gets knocked down a peg. She ends up in a situation where she's confronting a bunch of bandits, or a bunch of people who are raiding her camp, and she is able to take out a few of the other untrained fighters along with them, but when she comes up against someone who is actually trained, she is promptly and quickly defeated. That type of power level has to be kept in mind. And anything that I've brought up in this video, if you guys have already written into certain characters that you've designed, I'm by no means attacking you or anything like that. Like, these are just general ideas that I think should be kept in mind to keep everything balanced within Remnant, so that by introducing these characters into the canon universe, it doesn't alter the canon universe itself. But I'll go into more details in those specific categories, you know, when I get to those videos. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything specific you'd like me to touch on or cover in other videos, as I do have, you know, quite a few ideas already, but I would always love to get more and add those in, answer questions that other people have. Another good resource for, you know, finding out or getting feedback on your original characters is actually in my Discord server. We have our own channels for OC descriptions and OC discussion, and it's honestly pretty active. I'm jumping in there every once in a while, you know, giving feedback on semblances, on weapons, and how things would fit, and alternate choices that could be made for making certain abilities and semblances fit within the canon of RWBY. For actually starting out designing your OC, if you're having some trouble where to start, where to go, etc., think about the things that you like, or the things that you would like to see referenced. A good starting point is always, you know, fairy tales or the origins of the character, but they don't have to be fairy tales specifically. They can be any myth or legend, or even just a mythical creature, like Seraphina Vermilion. Her starting point was, I wanted a mascot for the Phoenix Knight YouTube channel. I have a bit of an obsession with phoenixes, or at least I have a deep love for them, so I was like, a phoenix. That would be a great start. Obviously, Faunus in the world of RWBY cannot be mythical creatures. There are only animalistic traits. Yuma, the bat Faunus. He was just a bat, not anything mythical. There's no angels or demons or manticores or dragons or anything like that. As fun as that would be, Faunus just are regular animalistic traits. There's scales from snakes or other lizards, or, you know, other things like that. You can be a bit creative with it, like Trifa and her spinnerets in her hands being a spider Faunus, so there are some unique things. And on top of that, every Faunus trait doesn't have to give a special ability with it, etc. But looking at something that you like or enjoy and wanting that referenced into a character or transformed into a character is a good place to start. Look at Neapolitan. She's Neapolitan Ice Cream, but is like the most beloved character in the RWBY series. There are plenty of things that you can take inspiration from to start designing your own character. And then think, well, what abilities would be cool to add to that? It's awesome if they can reference that same fairy tale on top of that, or that same mythical creature, or whatever it is, but it doesn't necessarily have to. When I was creating Sarah, again, I wanted a Phoenix character, so of course her abilities were going to revolve around fire, and so I related that to the RWBY series. What ability that we've already seen in RWBY would be something similar that I could do with fire that wouldn't break the universe? And then I landed on Nora's ability to absorb electricity into into her body and reproduce it into her muscles. So with Sarah, I did the same thing with heat and fire, and that she could reproduce it. Not amplifying it, because that would be a bit much, I think, by absorbing it and amplifying something back without having any downside on top of it. Look at Adam or Yang. They have to go through some extra steps to be able to amplify power that they've absorbed. I plan on doing power augmentation semblances in a separate video, so I'll touch on that more there, but still, there are certain things that have to be thought about to make semblances balanced, to make characters balanced, etc. You can also start off with just the idea of a semblance, or the idea of a weapon, or something that you think is cool, and try to design a character from that starting point. Or maybe you've seen even in the world of RWBY, you like a particular kingdom and want to design a character specifically for that kingdom. If you want to look into a character's design or something like that, because with all of the characters that I've designed, I've pretty much dictated pretty closely as to what I wanted their outfits to be, how I wanted them to look like, and things like that. If they are in the desert, for example, they are going to be exposed to a lot of sunlight. They're probably going to be a bit darker skinned. There are certain outfits that come with, you know, different places in the world of Remnant. Veil seems to be the more generalistic one of them, where it seems outfits can be quite varied, but Mistral seems to have its own certain look to it. Similarly with Vacuo, they're going to be dressing for the desert environment to keep the sand out of their faces, that type of thing. And, you know, Atlas, they're going to be dressing for the colds, trying to keep warm, and more militaristic if you want to go that route. There are a lot of things to consider, a lot of intricate details, but by all means, take your time with it. You don't have to create an OC character overnight. Seraphina Vermilion, for me, started over 2 years ago. You can see kind of hints of that back on my channel even, where over 2 years ago I made a video discussing where are the bird faunus? Where are the faunus with wings? Because, you know, we haven't really seen them yet. We had already seen Yuma by that point, but where are the rest of the ones? I don't see any of them, because I wanted to make a bird faunus character for my OC, for the mascot of this channel, and I landed on Seraphina Vermilion. The hardest part of making her design, like, I thought of the Phoenix, and that gave me, you know, a logical route to follow when it came to the Semblance, giving her wings as a faunus, and also I really wanted her to lean on that ability of having the wings for, you know, her weapons. So I made her weapons, you know, dust wing equipments, where she could fire out the knives from the weapons, and also have swords that could be unequipped from them, so she could have these 4 points of contact in battle, which gives her a lot of skill, and etc., and other things associated with that. And coming up with the actual fairy tale reference was one of the more later portions of making her design, when I landed on Icarus. I thought it would be a really poetic design to give her the ability of having wings, the ability of flight, and yet having that taken away. And that, you know, leaned into what the other characters would end up being as well for Team Seraph. They all originate from Greek mythology and things that, you know, stories that have happened within them. Some of them may be familiar, others you may not be so much, but, you know, you'll see when they get introduced to the channel. But again, the most difficult part for me about designing characters is the naming. The color naming rule is surprisingly difficult when you are trying to name them more than just a color. Obviously, with Seraphina Vermilion, the last name Vermilion is just a red color. Sarah's color itself is scarlet, so that just fit very well with that. But coming up with the name Seraphina, which is a name that, you know, references a couple of different things, the angels being also fiery winged and fiery ones, or depending on the translation, there are a couple different things, and a couple people did comment below that video that it doesn't exactly mean fiery winged, but I can see where you're coming from, you know. So I wanted it to have more than just a color reference, but also have more meaning on top of that. Depending on how specific you want to get with things, it can get quite complicated, but again, same thing I said at the beginning of this video. The more that you put into these characters, the more you will grow to love them, and I absolutely adore the characters that I've come up with. Sarah herself has had over 2 years put into her design. The other characters have had months put into them as well, looking at different outfits that would be for the desert or for menagerie, what would fit in, you know, Mistral or things like that, and how to design each of them. And it is a very rewarding process to get into and to eventually complete when you have your characters designed, and then you can start crafting their story, how they fit into the worlds and everything like that. But it can also be frustrating at times, so there's a lot of stuff to be aware of. I'm pretty sure this video has been over half an hour already, so if you've watched this long, thank you. Hopefully I've been able to give you more to think about and more to delve into when designing your own characters. I'm sorry that I've been rambling so long, but make sure to let me know in the comments down below what you think of designing your own characters. If there are other things you'd like me to touch on in other videos, and, you know, how your OCs are coming so far. Have they fit the, you know, general ideas that I've described? I don't really want to say rules because, again, I don't want to tell anyone how to design their own original characters, but still, I love seeing other people's characters, whether they are, you know, for canon RWBY or whether they're alternate universe, whatever it may be. I love seeing other characters and the amazing ideas that people come up with. But I will add one more thing, that since I am planning on doing my own version of the Phoenix Festival tournament for OC characters specifically, there will be rules very similar to the ones that I've described here for those type of characters that I would actually admit to that tournament. Though I will easily give a pass on characters that have 2 faunus traits instead of 1, as long as they don't give some sort of special ability or, you know, added function on top of that. Because, I mean, come on, having a cat faunus that has both the kitty ears and the tail, just brilliant. Same with if it's a dog faunus, or you want to give, you know, a reptilian faunus both scales and a tongue or ears or something like that. Like, there's a bunch of unique things that you can do that I probably would allow, as long as it doesn't interfere with the power scaling aspect of it or breaking, you know, the world of Remnant itself. But anyways, I've rambled enough. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've watched this far to hear me say this. If you've enjoyed this video and aren't subscribed already, make sure you do. Join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Join our Discord server, link in the description below. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.